Welcome to the Samueletini Show, where business, innovation and sustainability converge to drive progress. Are you ready to uncover solutions shaping our future? Let's dive in.
Welcome to a new episode, and today we are going to discuss an important topic, something that is really dear to my heart. I still remember when also as a young boy I was singing Laudato Si in church and then with the scouts and others. So I'm here today with somebody that is at the forefront of the Laudato Si movement, the executive director, Dr. Lorna Gold. Thank you so much, Lorna, to be here with us today.
Thanks, Samuel. It's really lovely to be here with you.
The importance of the religion and instead the Catholic Church is paramount in fostering, especially the legacy of Pope Francis, to really work towards a more sustainable and just world. Before going into the encyclical and the work that you are doing daily with the Laudato Si movement, can you tell us who is Lorna? How you have entered this world of sustainability?
Yeah, good question, Samuel. I don't think in my wildest dreams I would have imagined that I would be doing the job I'm doing today and having this role within the Laudato Si movement, which has involved working so closely with Pope Francis over the past number of years. I think if I go back to the start, I think my interest in this topic really started when I was a child. I grew up in central Scotland in the shadow of a massive oil refinery in Grangemouth. And you could see the impacts of that oil refinery from our front door. And it was so obvious to me, the impact on the environment. But I also knew at the same time, all my neighbours and indeed some of my family worked in the oil refinery or in North Sea oil. So this was like, it was part and parcel of the community, as well as something that I could see was destroying our environment. I did my first project on global warming actually when I was 14, and believe me, I wasn't a child genius. I didn't invent global warming. That's 40 odd years ago, but it was already an important topic being taught in schools in Scotland. And I remember being so shocked that this was actually happening. And yet here we are, our economy is being driven by oil and fossil fuels. So from there, I went ahead, I did a degree on economic geography. I then did a PhD where I delved into all those alternative economy ideas that were already out there, ecological economics, community-based economy. And I actually coined the phrase in my PhD, the sharing economy. The sharing economy for me wasn't what we know it nowadays. Like you say sharing economy and people think of companies like Uber or Airbnb. But for me, the sharing economy was about a community-based economy, and about mobilizing assets in a more just way, because so many assets are underutilized. So from there, I moved into policy and campaigns. I came to live in Ireland, worked with Trócaire, which is the Irish Caritas organisation, and got very involved in the whole area of sustainability and particularly climate justice. Climate justice for me became very much a focus because of the work that we did in Trócaire. I spent quite a lot of time in Africa and Latin America doing research around the impact of climate change on rural agriculture. And that was the spur for me in terms of this work. That whereas it was the canary in the coal mine. Here in Europe, we couldn't see the impacts. And yet our farmers who we worked with were telling us the rains are not coming. And when the rain comes, they're coming too heavy. We can't plant. So we could see so much of this work was being unravelled before our very eyes. And the humanitarian cost and the suffering was very real. So that's what got me into this. And then Laudato Si came. Then Pope Francis came. Pope Francis becoming Pope coincided exactly with me becoming a parent. And to me, those two things went side by side. I started to think of the future, think of my kids. I wrote a book on that called Climate Generation, about my own story, about thinking about what are we doing about this and the impact it's having on our children. And then we had Pope Francis saying we need to keep hope for the future. We need to start to mobilize to build that hope. And that, importantly, I think for me, as someone who grew up as a Catholic, he was saying this is part and parcel of our faith. Maybe we thought that these things, or maybe in my mind, they ran side by side. Environmental activist, I was campaigning on one side, and then I was going to church and I was trying to bring up my children in the Catholic faith. But Pope Francis, for me, was a game changer in saying that these are interconnected, that your faith and your commitment on environmental issues are one and the same. So, yeah, so that's a bit about my background.
Such a wonderful background. I mean, it's really, when you were discussing about the sharing economy, and really the sharing economy cannot be the one that I feel undermines rather than humanize worker. I mean, the gig economy and other, but the sharing, how to use assets and things. And what I really like, the hope for the future and the connection and the role of religion. Sometimes I agree with you. Was that this connection? Sometimes you go to church, you pray God, and then on the other side, during the, let's say, lay or mundane world, you behave in a totally different way. I think that Pope Francis put that together, especially on the environmental side. And you mentioned 2015 being one of the important, let's say, milestone, because the world was, I think, also a bit shocked or taken to a storm, like with the new encyclical, the Laudato Si, that really started the movement. So for the listeners that they might not be very familiar, so with the encyclical, even with this war, what it is and all, can you explain a bit what it is and also the main concept and things?
So Laudato Si is an official teaching of the Catholic Church. People need to understand that first and foremost. It's a social encyclical of the Catholic Church. It's part of the doctrine of the Catholic Church now. And that's really important. It isn't kind of an opinion of somebody. It's official teaching. In layman's language, you could say it's official policy of the Church. And that's important because it means that it is intended to inform the faith of the 1.4 billion Catholics who live on this planet. And importantly, the hierarchy, the priests, the bishops, the cardinals, the religious sisters, the brothers, the lay missionaries, who inform the consciences and behaviours of those 1.4 billion Catholics. So it's official teaching. Others, so that's kind of on the face of it. And there are many teachings of the Catholic Church. One important teaching document. It's much more than that, however. Others lay, let's say, important people, even as far as like people like Naomi Klein, who's a very well-known author, or people like Bill McKibben, or everybody has had an opinion about Laudato Si. And one person, I remember I was at a speaking engagement, a panel discussion about it shortly after it was published. And someone who was like an atheist, they didn't have any, but a very well-known academic in Ireland said, this is Pope Francis' love letter to the earth. And I love that. A love letter to the earth. It's the most beautiful text, piece of literature, actually, that is in parts akin to poetry and has some very powerful passages. And it really captures people's imaginations when they read it. So, like, what does it actually say and what does it cover? It's quite a complex document because it tries to tackle what we call the polycrisis that we're facing today. So the imminent collapse or a crisis in our ecological system and planetary crisis, and how that interconnects and relates to the economic and political crisis. And then he goes one step further to say, how does that then relate to let's say, the spiritual crisis, this crisis of consciousness of the human species. So to me, if you want to kind of think of it on a kind of parallel, to me, it's like the modern equivalent of the Brundtland Report. The Brundtland Report was the report of the Commission on Sustainable Development in the 1980s. And they had a document called Our Common Future, which took a global perspective. And this is one of the things Pope Francis does really well. And that's strikingly absent in our world today. A world leader, a kind of institution that takes this global viewpoint. Our Common Future tackled very similar issues in the 1980s, looking at the interplay between environment and economic situation. Pope Francis puts it in a different phrase. He says, our common home. So the subtext to Laudato Si is care for our common home. So he's kind of making a kind of statement there in using the language of home, which some people have you can kind of gloss over it. But saying something is about our common home has an assumption that we're a human family. So it's as much about the family. And in fact, Laudato Si has to be read alongside his other social encyclical about world peace, which is called Fratelli Tutti, which in Italian obviously is everybody, we're all brothers. But I think gender, let's be in a gender sensitive way, we would say we're all brothers and sisters. So he calls, these go hand in hand, care for our common home and recognising we're all brothers and sisters.
Fantastic, Lorna. I can see, it's also in the tradition of the church that dates back to the Second Vatican, I think, Council, in English, from the Populorum Progressio and the discussion. But really, Pope Francis went a step ahead, on this work. And really, what struck me when we read and discussed and see, really, how you critique what is there now our mode of behavior, especially in the Western world, but also here in the emerging market in Kenya, is really coming. The consumerism, a sustainable economic, a sustaining model, this throwaway culture and everything. So in your experience, and also maybe you can share a bit also about the movement, how this fifth debate framework can help shift really those mindsets that they seem so ingrained in our economic models?
It's a really good question. And I think that it's one which really, in a sense, ties back to my kind of early work where I was looking at the whole area of a sharing economy or economies of communion. And I think that faith offers so much richness in this whole area. I think first and foremost, it points to a faith approach points to a different anthropology. We don't often think about economic kind of thinking in terms of anthropology. And we've lost sight of this, that at the very foundation of our prevailing economic doctrines and policies, there's inaccurate assumptions, which are really have a devastating impact. This lack of ability of the economic system on two fronts in particular, I'd say. The first is on the behavioural side. So our economic doctrine fails, and our policies that are based on that, fail to take into account the human desire for the greater good and for happiness. It conflates human happiness with self-interest. And this is like my PhD was all on this topic. Like, it's almost seen as being irrational if you forego your self-interest. It's seen as something like there's a moral risk if you forego your self-interest to pursue the common good. That is a flaw that cuts across, and it goes all the way from how economics is taught from school all the way up to higher education, to PhDs. It means that there's a blind spot in our economic thinking. Now, others have started to address this. There's a huge school of thinking. I'm thinking of this the School of Civil Economy that looks at economics and happiness. So there's plenty of academic research which points to this gap in economic thinking, but it has still failed to become the mainstream in our economic, let's say, prevailing doctrine. This and faith has a lot to say about that. Faith has a lot to say about that anthropology. The second big flaw in our economics is around our planetary limits. So economics today, especially at the macro level, but then going all the way down to the local level, simply fails to incorporate our finite world, the fact we live on a finite planet that has planetary limits. So in doing that, in promoting this growth model at all costs, blind to the fact that these limits exist, it is pushing us. Our economic system is pushing us with accelerated speed towards the precipice, because we, as a human species, are entirely dependent on our ecosystem. Try breathing underwater and you'll learn very quickly how dependent we are. So, I mean, that's more a context, but in terms of what faith can do then, faith communities offer the most, let's say, thought through understanding of the human condition and anthropological foundations for that. Now, that's a very bold statement to say, but those tenets of religion have been enduring despite the last 200 years of capitalist economics. Faiths have endured. 80% of the world's population still identify as a believer in one faith or another. So that's an important entry point. And now that's not to say that every faith is engaged progressively in debates and discussions around our common home but there is an open door. There is an open door, and all faiths now in this, after the last 40 years, have statements, have policies, have teachings on care for the earth, on care for the poor, and have a lot to say on deep motivation and behavioural norms that could engage us in a different discussion around economics. Faiths are also major asset holders in our planet. Previous to this job that I have now, I worked in the whole area of ethical investments and the faiths. And that was an eye-opener, because I learnt about the trillions of assets that faiths have invested both in the stock exchange and also the hard assets that they have in terms of buildings, schools, universities, hospitals, even businesses. So they can bring a lot of economic firepower if they are mobilized towards a different economy.
And it's really an important point, because it's really where also change can start, because where we start with the discussion thing. I want to go back a bit, because Pope Francis was a pope that during his years and work has really built many bridges. He went for the people on the last. He also built bridges with other faith and religion. I think, if I recall correctly, was the first and only pope that since centuries set foot on the Arabian Peninsula, for example. The discussions on interfaith discussion and declaration. So really also the encyclical and the Laudato Si and the movement that stems there, I think resonate with most of the people of the earth, being their diehard atheists, even or faithful or other area, because this is our, let's say, common home and common spirit. So how do you see which key values? I mean, have you seen this also in your work, and have you seen people that, notwithstanding maybe the few ideological, maybe doctrinal differences, they come on board? Because of course, it's more what unite us than divide us.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. And in fact, Laudato Si is unique in that kind of respect. as a clarion call for us all to work together. As a church document, it's the first ever Catholic document that's addressed to all people on the planet. So other popes have wished to address it to people of goodwill, but this is addressed to everybody, the good, the bad, the ugly. We're all in there precisely because we all share one planet. And I think also the document Laudato Si was created in a process of dialogue. And that's really clear in how it's written. It's the first church document that extensively quotes science, and there were scientists involved, as well as many Catholic civil society organisations. So that gives a really good foundation for engaging people. And in Laudato Si, it talks about the need for an ongoing dialogue between faith and science. For Pope Francis, who was a trained chemist himself, so before he became a priest, he was a chemist and he worked as a chemist. Science and faith are not polar opposites, which is often how it's presented certainly in Western culture. That if you're a person of faith, and I faced this myself also in working with the environmental movement, if you're a person of faith, you're often seen as kind of like people look at you a little bit like curiously, like, do you believe all that stuff? Like the kind of like, do you really believe all that? Kind of like as if they see it as a bit of something that's a kind of legacy of the past. Whereas Pope Francis was very good at kind of encouraging respect between people. And you mentioned his trip to the Arabian Peninsula. He really reached out to Muslim leaders in particular and formed friendships with key Muslim leaders and encouraged collaboration on this topic, and on the whole area of peace. And in fact, through Laudato Si, a whole movement began within the Islamic world around ecology. And just last year, a group of in the Islamic world, there isn't a pope, so it's not like a pope can issue a document for everybody, but a leading group of Islamic scholars published a teaching called Al-Mizan, the balance, which is the equivalent to them of Laudato Si. And many of the authors of that report or that teaching document call it the Muslim Laudato Si. And it's a very beautiful document and provides a real opportunity and a platform for dialogue where the Islamic tradition and the Muslim world doesn't have to look to the Catholic world or the Christian world for these teachings. They are inherent within the Quran and within other Islamic teachings. So I think that's a really important opportunity, like for Muslim-Christian dialogue. And it's one of the things that really strikes me in my work is working together in a practical way for the good of the environment or ecological projects is something that all faiths can do together. It becomes a dialogue of life as opposed to theological dialogue, because when you sit down and you just use your heads between different faiths and very learned people who know the sacred texts, it can become a dialogue of looking at what divides. Whereas if you start with the people, you can focus on what brings us together. And that is really what we're seeing in the movement. It is this dialogue of life. Are these opportunities to work on common projects of reforestation, of cleaning up our local areas? So it's a really powerful witness as well to unity amongst different faiths.
And it's really an important part, of the movement, and things we always stressed all over during many episodes, notwithstanding the divide, ideological, political, religious, and others. We all breathe. We all want a clean environment. We all want to raise our kids and our grandchildren in art that is not even maybe the same as we found it, but maybe even better. So that helps a lot, and I think it is a long-lasting legacy of Pope Francis. And to dig a bit deeper, how the church approaches sustainability, environmental stewardship. There is a discussion about integral human development, sviluppo integrale umano in Italian. So how this guides really the teaching of the church, how this also during the years of Pope Francis has changed also how the church work.
It's a really good question, and I think it's on a number of different levels. So this approach of integral human development really, I mean, it dates back to Populorum Progressio, which you mentioned earlier, which was at the in the 1960s when the Second Vatican Council, and it really was a counter to this idea, which sadly is perhaps even more prevalent today, that human development is a single kind of unidimensional issue. So, like conflating human development with economic development, and a particular kind of economic development. So this idea of integral development is about looking at the whole human person, but also looking at the whole human person in the context of our interactions with our environment. So that's the dimension I think that Pope Francis brought to this, that to be integral, the integral human development is also about an integral ecology. So you can't have human development without an integral ecology. So how that has kind of played out in the past 10 years, I would say is on a number of levels. One is around the whole area of how it integrates with the teachings of the church, in terms of how we celebrate liturgies, how it finds its way into our prayer life, how it is a part and parcel of how it's taught, importantly, the formation of our priests, the formation of our ministries. And that's a slow process, I'll be honest. That is a very slow process. And there have been some good steps forward in that regard, but there's also resistance. I'm conscious of that. The church moves quite slowly when it comes to issues of shifting doctrine, and 10 years is the blink of an eye in the history of the church. But some important initiatives have been made. So, for example, Pope Francis brought in the World Day of Prayer for Creation and adopted this idea of a season of creation for the month of the month of September. It runs from the 1st of September to the 4th of October. 4th of October is the feast of St. Francis. And that is now instituted. The Day of Prayer is in the church calendar. And then this month of celebrations is celebrated in many, many parts of the world, also through the work that the Laudato Si Movement does. And that offers an opportunity for that to become part integral to the celebrations of the church. I guess, but much more can be done. There's now a movement ecumenically to have a liturgical feast which celebrates creation, and that is gathering momentum. And in fact, the last meeting I had with Pope Francis this year on the 29th of January was specifically to talk about this moving forward with this liturgical feast of creation. And that would be important theologically for the church to kind of institutionalize the whole area of ecology and Laudato Si. The second kind of area where it's moved forward is on the whole issue of becoming more sustainable ourselves. So I mentioned about the assets. The Catholic Church has incredible assets, 200,000 parishes across the world, 1,000 or so universities affiliated to the church. What if we could just get all of those, first and foremost, to become carbon neutral or to lessen their footprint? So one of the most important initiatives Pope Francis gave leadership to in this area is the Laudato Si Action Platform, which is Vatican-sponsored online sustainability platform, which is basically Laudato Si Movement is the operational partner. So we run it, but we don't own it. We run it on behalf of the Universal Church. To date, we have 5,000 Catholic institutions signed up to that platform. And that platform, basically, you have to sign up to the platform, you have to come up with a corporate plan for your organization on sustainability. So we have 5,000 institutions who have prepared plans. So these go from, for example, the Jesuits, who are a vast network in their own right, and how they're going to achieve the objectives of Laudato Si, or the Catholic hospitals, so that it takes time to do this work. Those institutions, the fact it's taking the platform started in 2020. I've kind of forgotten, but it's a few years old. But once organizations hear about it, it takes time to incorporate that then into your institutional frameworks. But it's really good news that 5,000 are leading the way. And we're just in a couple of weeks, the platform is being completely revamped and relaunched as part of the legacy of Pope Francis during Laudato Si Week, which is the last week in May. And that platform, we hope, will continue to grow and address the sustainability of the Catholic Church. Moves have also been made around addressing the investments of the church, and there was a document called Mensurum Bonum. It's not an official church document, but it offers really good guidelines around how to shift your financial investments towards alignment with the values of Catholic social teaching. So there are shifts forward, and many, many Catholic organisations have divested from fossil fuels. I think that's a no-brainer, to be honest. I'm a little bit biased here, but I think getting your assets out of the most polluting industries is kind of like...
It's a no-brainer. It's a no-brainer.
No-brainer for Catholic organisations today. And then finally, the third kind of element for me, so there's the kind of institutionalizing it's more in a faith way, there's the sustainability, but the third one is about speaking out. It is so important that the church raises its voice in favour of, let's say, people and planet. And there's countless ways the church can do that. Every bishop's conference has a platform nationally to do that, to have courage to do that. And many bishops' conferences have done that. I know here in Ireland, the bishops are very vocal. In Italy, the bishops are very vocal. Continental bishops' conferences are very active, especially ahead of COP30, in preparing statements and engaging with climate negotiators around climate change. The Vatican, too, has also raised its voice through Pope Francis, but also through symposiums, statements, and is now a full party to the COP. So the Vatican state is a full member of the UNFCCC COP process. And that's an opportunity to speak up and to speak out. So those are the ways in which it's really moved forward. And of course, we have a movement. And maybe I've forgotten to say that the Laudato Si movement is a lay movement. It's a movement of ordinary people who commit themselves to making Laudato Si a lived reality. And so far, we've trained over 40,000 local leaders.
Wow.
20,000 of which have received a certification that they're trained in Laudato Si leadership. And those leaders are now present in 140 countries. So this has become a grassroots movement over the past few years. Especially, you mentioned COVID, and it's interesting that COVID for Laudato Si movement was a real spark for growth. because during COVID, we offered online trainings, and people felt freer perhaps during COVID to learn about things. And that has continued since COVID. And we regularly train up to, at the moment, our online courses is running, and we have around 5,000 people doing the Laudato Si Animators course. It's free, it's online. Anybody can sign up for it at any point of the year. So yeah, it's a great course.
And I wanted to ask this question really, how it works, the movement. I mean, also people that are not maybe, let's say, use this center charge connected, can enroll in the movement, can learn from your courses, and how also they can spread and move to action.
Of course, it's open to everybody. So the main way to get involved in Laudato Si movement is to engage, to sign up to one of our newsletters, and then you'll start to hear about events that are happening. We do a lot online because that's how we started, was through an online campaign, and a lot of our work is online. Even at a local level, we stay connected a lot by using online platforms. So people can get involved through attending our events online, and then through engaging in the animators course, and also through then becoming connected then. If you do the animators course, we then connect you with whoever's in your local area. People who do the course generally do a project at the end of it, a community-based project, very simple. To get your certificate, you have to do a seed project, which can be simply a presentation to your local community. But then you become connected with other people, which is really a great way to feel involved. And we work through the framework of Laudato Si, which does have a spiritual dimension to it. It is through that spiritual framework of Laudato Si. But I think that people who are non-Catholic, who come into contact with that, often find their own spiritual context and it revives their own spiritual tradition, which is a lovely thing. That most of our members would be Catholics because Laudato Si came from the Pope. But there are other people involved who are from other Christian traditions or Muslim traditions, or people who have no faith but feel they're comfortable with the spiritual nourishment that comes from Laudato Si.
And it's fantastic, Lorna. It's really the way also humanity, we are in a common plan, a common home, and a common species. And we have also responsibility towards, we could say, our planet, the creation, and it's really an important part. So notwithstanding the differences, let's say doctrinal differences, maybe also in science, in history, rather than in teachings. And then from there, now we can craft a path forward. Let me ask you. I mean, we have spoken a lot, and we are going towards the end of that. But I want to ask a question that we are recording on the brink. I mean, at the eve of the conclave. I don't know how to say it in English. Of the election of the next pope, and for sure, we want to ask you. What is the future for the Mundo? What do you think will be the legacy? And would the church not only commit more, but even reinforce this, especially looking at the current crisis that is not reducing speed, but actually increasing in imbalances?
Yeah, I mean, so we're recording this before we know who the new pope is, and by the time people hear it, we will have a new pope. And I'm confident that whoever the pope is, this issue is not going to go off the agenda. In fact, the area of ecology, and the area that Pope Francis drew attention to in Laudato Si, is part of a long tradition in the Catholic Church. It was first an issue for John Paul II, who spoke about this. And then we actually called Pope Benedict the Green Pope, which is quite amazing, considering he had he raised this issue many times, but we perhaps didn't really notice because he was focused on other issues. So this is part of a long tradition, and the area of stewardship of the environment is part of a long tradition within the church. And I think what is really interesting to me is that Pope Francis, in his papacy, laid solid foundations, and he entrusted this work to the likes of Laudato Si Movement and other initiatives in the church which are carrying this work forward. And he provided us with the tools to be able to get on and to do this work, and to do it confidently, knowing that we have the backing of the universal church, that we're doing this very much in line with the teachings of the church. So that is really, really important, that we will continue to move forward. And we have so much support. In particular, this year, we're marking 10 years of Laudato Si. And this October, we have a really important global conference ahead of the COP30. And the engagement of people, both bishops, cardinals, who want to be part of this initiative to mark the 10th anniversary is really, really striking. This has become an unstoppable force within the Catholic Church. It isn't entirely dependent on the let's say the Vatican, although leadership is so important. But that leadership comes from many, many different places. But I'm really confident that the new Pope will put this high on their agenda, and they'll have obviously a massive inbox of issues that they need to tackle. But certainly I look forward in the near future to meeting the new Pope, whoever he is. The listeners know, but I don't. I really look forward to meeting him, as we have with Pope Francis, and to looking at how we can work closely together to ensure that the work of the church in this area continues to grow.
Fantastic, Lorna. And as a closing question, I want to ask, can you share, since you have been very close to Pope Francis, you have been with him, can you share a moment that really touched your heart within these years?
Gosh, there's so many, but one that really comes to mind was on the eve of the pandemic. I met him with the board of Laudato Si Movement, and it was a very intimate meeting where we sat in a circle and shared our personal stories, a bit like I've shared today, about why we have become so involved in this area of work. And he also shared his story. When it came to my turn, I shared about becoming a mother and how my own motivation comes deeply from looking at my children's future. The Pope, at the end of the meeting, when we went to shake hands, he said, I need to show you something. And I was like, he remembered it, that I talked about being a mum. He says, I want to show you something. And this was totally unscripted. He brought all the board out to a corridor and he showed us a tapestry of the birthing of the universe. And it's a beautiful tapestry which shows hands birthing a baby, a bit like the kind of Michelangelo kind of style of the birthing of the universe. And he gave us a catechesis, but he was looking at me because it was about motherhood. And he said, this picture, it shows strong but gentle hands birthing this new life into the world. And then he says, we all need to be like that now. We all need to be like mothers. And
wow.
Yeah. It was a very touching moment. And I also got the chance to give him my book that day. So, yeah, I'll treasure that, as all of the other moments, because he was whenever you met him, he had this capacity to make you feel you were really the only thing that mattered in that moment. And I was just he listened. Like, I couldn't believe that he'd absorbed all these stories, but then he actually heard me when I said about being a mum. So yeah, I'll take that with me as a memory.
And it's also a very touching and very important leadership lesson. We also discuss about the listening leader, the one who, and more often than often, I mean, people leaders, they just shout and without listen. And this is how in practice somebody that was leading faith of 1.4 billion people listening and really touching the heart of every single person. So, Lorna, I really want to thank you so much for your wonderful episode. It's been an honor and pleasure having you. And I'm sure we will see, especially the COP is such an important part. And we really hope that the movement, and we'll see how will foster the legacy even more of Pope Francis. Thank you so much for this episode.
Thank you.
Are you satisfied after this wonderful episode? Let's continue together our sustainability journey.